Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Shai Gozani. He is the president and CEO of Neurometrix. Shai, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
So for the benefit of the listeners, I think it would be worth exploring a little bit of your background. You're certainly unusual as a physician, actually doctor, as we noted. You have an MD, PhD, but your background goes back a little bit further, which is relevant to all of this. Can you share a little bit of that?
Happy to. Thank you. So my original background, I was an electrical engineer and computer scientist back in the early 80s at UC Berkeley, where I did my undergraduate work. I subsequently took a job at Bell Laboratories, which was sort of the epitome of technology at the time in the mid 80s, and that was a great experience. And then went back to graduate school, originally around electrical engineering, also at UC Berkeley. And there I got interested in not just electrical engineering, computer science for in the traditional way, but really how electrical engineering and computer science could either be applied to problems in medicine or science. And I ended up kind of switching gears and doing a PhD in a neurobiology laboratory with the professor there, John Miller, was a lost physicist. He was actually a physicist originally who ended up in neuroscience. So we kind of, I think, sort of had a similar perspective. And my work there was using various kinds of signal processing techniques and measurement techniques to assess how, believe it or not, crickets, common house crickets, processed information. And that got me fascinated in neurobiology and neuroscience. Ultimately ended up finishing my PhD there. But as I was doing that, I really realized that what I wanted, my passion was medicine, and I wanted to bring this expertise to medicine. So I was fortunate enough to go to medical school in the joint Harvard-MIT program called Health Sciences and Technology, which is a kind of a place where people with that kind of background often find homes. Ended up doing my MD there. Ended up then doing a postdoctoral fellowship in neuroscience. And just absolutely found my passion, which is bringing these concepts of electrical engineering, computer science, signal processing, so forth to problems in medicine. And then as I was wrapping up my research fellowship, I decided to start a company, Neurometrix, to try to be the sort of the output of that passion, and that became Neurometrix in about 96, 97.
So it's interesting. You referenced Neurometrix. You've been at this for a while, and it's gone through a series of sort of innovations and insights. I mean, what's really intriguing to me is that you have this blended background with deep insights in both signals and signal processing, programming, and then obviously medicine and the research aspect. Tell us a little bit about Neurometrix and the journey that you've had in terms of the discovery of solutions and some of the things that you brought to the marketplace already.
Yeah, it's a journey now that's over 2 decades old, which is shocking, because when I started it, I remember telling my wife, I said, well, we'll probably be at this for a few years, and then I'm sure something else will happen. But 23 years later, the journey continues, and I have to say, it's a blessing, because I come in every day and I do something that I'm really interested in and find rewarding. So we originally started around the concept of measuring nerve signals, so neurometrics, meaning nerve measurement, and we originally locked in on the idea that objective quantitative measures of nerve function in patients, if that could be propagated widely throughout the medical community, so not just something that only specialists could do, but generalists, internists and GPs and physicians who don't typically have the training specifically to do that kind of objective nerve measurement. That's called nerve conduction studies. We thought that could really be an advantage. It could, sort of in the concept of point of care testing, of bringing the test to the patient, so the patient can get evaluated right there when they were being seen by the physician with objective measures so the physician can make good, solid decisions. And obviously, if it's a very complicated case, they would go to the specialist. And so we developed a product called NC Stat, or nerve conduction stat, which ultimately became a very broadly used platform, and it is even today for a variety of different what's called neuropathies or nerve disorders. And the two biggest applications of that are rapid assessment for carpal tunnel syndrome, which is a compressive nerve disorder at the wrist, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, and diabetic neuropathy, which is degenerative nerve disease associated with diabetes, which is the most common chronic complication of diabetes. So those are the two probably most common neuropathies, at least in the U.S. And really most industrialized nations. So that was our objective, was to bring these tools to physicians. And now something, DPN-Check, which is the diabetic neuropathy test, is widely used throughout the world. Not just in the U.S., but in Japan and Mexico and Europe and China. And it's really starting to have an impact on early detection of neuropathies, which ultimately, if neuropathies are unchecked and untreated and unmanaged, can progress to foot ulcers and amputation. So that was our focus for really the first 15 years. As we entered the sort of 2011, 2012 period, we both, sort of intellectually and as a business, we started asking, well, what's next? I mean, we've got these diagnostic platforms where we've developed really advanced neurostimulation technology, very good automation to make these measurements viable in non-specialist settings. What else can we do? We also became aware, both through the diseases that we were interacting with, and just the sort of the popular press with the chronic pain and opioid crises that were occurring are expanding at the same time. So the question became to us, the question was, hey, can we apply this neurostimulation technology in a therapeutic way in chronic pain, and maybe make a dent in that crisis, as well as maybe make a dent in the burgeoning opioid crisis. We, of course, were aware of one application of neurostimulation, which is called TENS devices, or transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. TENS has been around for a very long time, has a bit of a checkered past, but yet a lot of good science has been done around it. And so we looked at that science and said, can we take our expertise, take the best of the science that's been done, apply great engineering principles, computer science principles, and build a new platform around the concept of TENS that potentially can help people with chronic pain, treat their pain maybe less pharmacologically than they would otherwise. And that ultimately became what's now the Quell platform.
And concurrent to this, what's happening, if you looked at the chart, you'd see this massive increase in terms of opioid consumption, treatment, and there's lots of commentary. I don't want to sort of dig into the the blame storming that exists. You've looked at this and said, well, here's a non-pharmacological way. And I had the privilege of trying this. You were kind enough to share a device with me. I'm fortunate enough that whilst I suffer pain, I don't certainly have the chronic and extensive. So from my perspective, my experience was limited to how does this platform work? What are the sort of processes and so forth? And what's really striking to me is we're talking about centralized pain relief with a device that essentially is mounted around the knee, right? How does this work? What's the science behind this?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and so it's been known now for about, I would say, at least 15 years, if not longer, that the primary mode of action of peripheral nerve stimulation is in the CNS. And there are two theories here. So by that I mean, when I say CNS, I'm referring to central nervous system. So even though you're stimulating peripherally, you're stimulating a nerve. In our case, we chose, and I can explain why we chose the nerves around the upper calf or near the knee. There's a good reason for that. The site of action, and again, this is theoretical. It's been studied in animal models and human experimental models. So like any mechanism of action, it's the best theory of the day, but it seems pretty compelling. What's happening is when you stimulate peripheral nerves, so you stimulate these nerves in the leg, and in fact, you feel it. You feel a buzzing or vibration or a pressure sensation. It's not uncomfortable. That signal, of course, then travels up into your spinal cord and then up into your brain. Of course, otherwise you wouldn't perceive it. So the signal is getting to your brain. That strong, high frequency stimulation signal activates the endogenous pain centers, pain modulatory centers that everybody has. We have them both in the spinal cord, we have them in the brain stem, which is the lower levels of the brain, and we actually have them even at the higher levels of the brain in the cerebral cortex. So this signal triggers the brain to activate its own ability to downregulate or turn down the volume of pain signal. And so even though this stimulus is coming from the outside, it's activating mechanisms in the brain to reduce the perception of pain. One way that this has been it can be visualized. It's often described as, in very abstract but a valuable way, as a gate, the gate theory of pain, as I'm sure you're aware of. And the concept is that you've got these normal signals, sensory signals that we're activating with stimulation. They're not painful. It's what you feel as touch or vibration or pressure. And then you have pain signals, and they're both coming into the brain, first through the spinal cord and then up to the brain. But there's a gate. And if you stimulate these normal, non-painful nerves, they will close the gate, thereby blocking the pain signals from getting to the brain. And that abstraction is called the gate theory, but it's actually now been understood at a molecular basis, and it involves various kinds of neurotransmitters, including, interestingly enough, opioids, your own endogenous opioids, which everybody's familiar with. Endorphins. There's other opioids called enkephalins. These are your own safe pain-regulating molecules, and it looks like this neurostimulation triggers your brain to overproduce them and actually reduce pain in a safe way. External opioids, the topic of the opioid crisis, are basically tapping into that system, but in a very messy way. So yeah, it's a fascinating sort of thing where peripheral stimulation triggers the brain to block pain centrally as opposed to peripherally, and it can be very powerful. And in fact, there is data that suggests that people that have pain that's primarily or are more centered in the brain, conditions like fibromyalgia, for example, or other types of nerve conditions, respond really well to this kind of stimulation.
So for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and today I'm talking to Dr. Shai Gozani, the President and CEO of Neurometrix. We were just talking about the methodology behind the TENS, or transcutaneous nerve stimulation, and the Quell device that has essentially taken that to the next level. I have a sort of relative question to this from my history when I was training to be a medical student. I had the fortune of going out with a vet. We had a vet in the family. And I learned one of the most interesting and effective techniques for taking blood, and it was as a result of being next to a horse that essentially kicked me when I was doing that. And, I was asking the vet how he managed to avoid that. And he actually had a technique of hitting the horse multiple times and then inserting the needle. And my sense is that that's a very simplistic version of this as part of the gate theory. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it is a fair assessment. There's the gate theory there's different aspects of that. There's also kind of this concept of distraction. One stimulus on one part of the body can block pain on stimulus on another part of the body, and there's sort of a inherent distraction aspect to that. But yeah, that approach, that's exactly the approach. So that kind of sort of comfortably but consistently tapping the horse is a kind of a stimulus that then may block the more traditional painful signal from the injection. Absolutely. So yeah, you were experiencing the pain.
I'm not getting kicked or upsetting my patients as a result of that. So as you look back on this journey, long journey, both exciting, interesting, are there any specific sort of inflection points or learning points that you had as part of the innovation that came about, both in terms of the diagnostic tool sets, the signal processing? What were the sort of small incremental things that you found along the way that allowed you to get to this point of both, diagnostic tools, but now treatment tools?
What's kind of been to me always amazing is that it's really not from an engineering perspective or biomedical engineering perspective. It's pretty straightforward to get to kind of 90% or even 95% of the solution. It's really hard to get that last 5 or 10%. And this is true in neurodiagnostics, and it's true in neurotherapeutics. And maybe to put it in more concrete terms, in neurodiagnostics, you take our diabetic neuropathy device called DPN check. You're measuring from the sural nerve, which is a nerve that's in the ankle. That signal, even in a healthy young adult, is maybe 20 microvolts. A microvolt is a millionth of a volt. And so just, a very tiny signal. To induce that signal, you have to stimulate the nerve with up to 400 volts. So you're talking many, many, many orders of magnitude difference. The diseased nerve is going to be below about, say, 6 microvolts. The level of just noise, thermal noise, is about 1 to 2 microvolts. So you're really only operating, at right around the threshold of measurability. But yet you're trying to do this in a clinic in, Beijing with somebody who's not particularly trained, with, all kinds of electrical equipment around you and so on and so forth. So being able to make a measurement in a laboratory is one thing. That's the 90%. Being able to take that into a setting that is uncontrolled, real world, where it really can make an impact on a population level, and reliably, with high sensitivity and high specificity, make that measurement such that you can reliably make a diagnostic assessment. That last 5 or 10% could take years or longer to achieve, and it's incredibly detailed. But it's a series of, to use the concept of incrementalism, it's a series of very incremental improvements, very patiently improving all aspects of your measurement technology, your signal processing, your software techniques, and so on and so forth. And there's not a lot of, you don't get a lot of credit after you go past the 90%, but to make it a practical, effective tool, you have to get there to the 99th percentile. And it may take 6 months to get to 90%. It may take 5 years to go from 90 to 99. And that's where a lot of academic researchers don't go, and companies don't go there, because it's difficult. And what I've learned over time is really, if you can close that last gap, that's what really differentiates you ultimately in the marketplace.
As you think back to your background, what was it that allowed you to do that? Because as you point out, there's lots of academics, that have these insights and, thoughts, ideas, technologies, research, but you made that leap. Was there something in your background that gave you was it the will? Was it as simple as that, or was there something more?
Well, it's interesting. Doesn't it always go back to your parents? So my father's a nuclear physicist, and he always told me, the only true scientists are physicists. So when I became a computer scientist, I disappointed him. When I became a physician, I doubly disappointed him.
Right.
But I think there's something to be said there. Physicists, and I studied. I actually started out as a dual computer science and physics major, and then I dropped the hard one, which was physics, and I continued with the easier one, which was computer science. But there's something to be learned there. And I did do a lot of physics. Physics is a study of ultimate precision. And when the kind of measurements that physicists make, nuclear physicists in particular, are almost impossible. You can't imagine what they do. And so there's a level of precision there that I seeing my father, in his work, both in academics and industry, sort of, I think that must have embedded in me that pursuit. And so, and then, and quite honestly, electrical engineering carries some of that. And I'm sure, you have seen this, Nick, as well. The best physicians are the ones that leave leave no stone unturned. Again, it's the same thing. You can get to the sort of the diagnosis in 90% of the questions, but to really get to the bottom of it, there's a lot more you have to do. Obviously, you have to do it intelligently, not wastefully. And I think you see that in every discipline. Again, I saw it in my father's work. I saw it in the best people that in engineering and computer science and medicine. I think it all came together. So that's the only way I know how to develop products, is with that principle of completeness. And it really is incrementalism at its best, because there are no big jumps. When you're going from that 90% to that 99%, you're going in 0.1% jumps. It's all very small improvements, which are hard and just get you a little bit further along the way. But when you add them up, you're making a big difference.
So as you stepped into the medical world, and I fully understand that. My father was an engineer. That disappointment of moving away from science. Did you struggle with the I don't want to say lack. It's not lack of science in medicine, but it's more of an art of blending the sort of the precision with the gut feel almost. Was that a challenge?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. I was very frustrated. I probably wasn't the best medical student as a result, because I was always looking for that sort of quantitative approach, and was frustrated by a lot of what I experienced. But I also understood it. I mean, that's sort of the state of medicine. So you can lament about it, or you can leverage your specific expertise to make it better. So that's what I started Neurometrix around, which was, if you think about it, and I'm sure, Nick, this is how you were trained to study neuropathies, with monofilaments and tuning forks and the reflex hammer. And you look at that's honestly, that's 18th century, medicine, right? I mean, it's, and so you can sort of look at that and say, well, that's the best, or you can say, what can we do to make it better, at least in your specific area of focus. So I looked at it as an opportunity, more than anything else, and I think many others do the same thing, and you're seeing that now in in genetic testing and all the things that are going on in other kinds of diagnostics and so forth. So yeah, I mean, I think in digital health is a great example of now how we're collecting objective information about. We can collect unprecedented amounts of information about patients of objective nature, and I think we're at the point of, it's an amazing time to be in medicine, because the tools we have are going to change medicine exactly the way that we, people like you and me have been hoping to do. And I think, it will move away from some degree from the art, but there's always going to be an art to it, and I think the art's important.
So we've got a little bit of time left. Could you just in the last minute or so, share the details of the science behind the Quell device, and how you're currently working through some of that to sort of prove it out. Where is that, and what's the sort of progress?
Yeah, so in sum total, I mean, there's a real need for devices like Quell to have additional science done. There's been some good science done historically. We're doing really two kinds of science. We're doing randomized controlled trials on specific disease conditions. So we for example, there was a study done here in Boston at Harvard Medical School in low back pain, and looking at Quell versus patients who had traditional treatment of low back pain. We've got a study right now also at Harvard in fibromyalgia. And those are your traditional randomized, scale observational, real world studies to really understand how the device impacts patients or chronic pain sufferers in the real world. And then we're trying to combine these data sets to really see how the device can best be used and can be improved. But it's a journey. It's not a destination.
And for the purposes of clarity, I know you sort of talked about like the best understanding and so forth. I think I want to be sure this is not this works, and there's good science. We just don't know exactly why it works.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, we have theories. We have theories, and they're useful, and you just have to keep on pushing it. And if your data doesn't support the theory, then your theories are morph, and that's the nature of science, and that's the nature of medicine. But it is useful, and a lot of people benefit. So it's safe, and I think that's really a great combination.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, as is always the case, we've run out of time. So it remains for me to thank you, Shai, for coming on the show. It's been a true delight. I always learn something on every show, and a real pleasure talking to you and learning more about the company and some of the new methodologies for treating pain and diagnosing neurological conditions.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed being here.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, The Incrementalist, or share with me at DrNick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at HealthcareNOW Radio.com. And tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.